Based in Melbourne, Maddison Sharman has been in the healing arts for 13 years, running a developed solo practitioner business in which she currently offers bodywork, yoni massage, remedial and pregnancy massage, flower essences, sound healing, reiki, sacred sexual healing, and more. At the time of our conversation, Maddison was a new doula training with Rhea Dempsey, and she was on call to attend her very first birth. Maddison's journey to birthwork was almost by accident when one of her pregnant clients asked her to accompany her for her first birth. Of course, it wasn't really an accident though, as the signs to birthwork had been there for a long time. In this conversation, we talk about the ways Maddison is creating space to enrich her practice by adding the role of doula to her repertoire, and what she's doing to prepare for her very first birth. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Welcome to the Whole Doula podcast. The Whole Doula podcast is a conversation space for doulas and birth workers to talk about the diverse paths that led them to birth work, as well as the diverse and unique skills, interests and offerings they bring to their birth-keeping roles. Here I dive into conversations with others who may be wondering how to bring the different aspects and experiences of their own lives into their roles as doulas in business. After all, there is more than one way to doula, and I'd love to help others see the connections between all the different parts of themselves, to see themselves as a whole doula. I am your host, Mary Giordano, doula, birth educator, counsellor, and doula business mentor, and this is the Whole Doula podcast. I hope you enjoy listening. I'm really excited to hear from doulas from a whole range of different backgrounds about what brought them to birth work and what their unique story is and what that's unique to clients. So maybe we can start with an introduction, Maddison, and you can let us know how you refer to yourself and what your sort of roles are or titles, if you like, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So I operate under my brand Temple and Remedy, and I've been working in, the healing arts and body work for about 13 years now. So I'm actually still a baby doula. I'm currently training with Rhea Dempsey to graduate at the end of the year. And it's a tricky one, what I call myself, because after doing this kind of work for so long, obviously I have many different modalities under my belt, and I offer about 10 different modalities. So I kind of say, body worker. I say massage therapist because it's real easy to I understand that one.
I know what that is.
Yeah, exactly. But I do a lot of things. And I think depending on the conversation and the person I'm talking to is how much I divulge of what that is.
Yeah, thank you for that. And so you said that you're a baby doula or sort of new in your doula journey and the other things have led you to here. So do you see yourself as a doula or still sort of emerging?
I do. I feel like because it's in the cultural lexicon and people kind of are learning what doula is, that is the easiest way for them to understand what I do in my doula practice. So if they're still like, is that like a midwife? And then I go, it's the social, emotional, spiritual support for the mother. It's not a medical role. It's more of a birth attendant, supportive person in the space to support the mother and the partner. And they're like, oh, yes, I've heard of that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Beautiful. So you said you've been in the healing arts for more than a decade. And you're just sort of emerging as a doula more recently and training with Rhea Dempsey, which I'm sure is really beautiful. I've had a lot of great things about training with Rhea. Could you tell me a little bit about how you came to arrive into birth work, sort of on the back of the other things you've been doing that are complementary over the last 13 years or so?
Yeah, so I also do yoni massage and sacred sexual healing for my clients and work towards internal work with some of my clients, helping them to resolve things like sexual trauma and that sort of thing. So I have a few clients that I've worked with very deeply over the years and have established quite a strong trust relationship. If you can imagine, that kind of body work requires a lot of presence and trust and vulnerability. And one of my clients actually from that part of my practice, she became pregnant and she invited me to be her doula. And I was just like, oh my God, I almost cried. I was one of the first persons she told. And of course I said yes. So her inviting me into her birth space was the catalyst for me going, you know what, I think it's time. When I had my son about 9 years ago, I realized when the veil was lifted on the birth world as you might say, when I had my own pregnancy journey and birth journey, I realized how important this work was and how much I wanted to, at some point, devote my energy to it. And I think then it's finally become the time now where I have the support in my life and the capacity to be able to really step fully into that, which feels super exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. I love how the journey of doulaing almost happened by accident through this relationship with your client in the other area.
Yeah. I feel like that's the nature of this kind of work, is like you just follow where you're led and you just say yes when it feels right. And I just said 100% yes. And then I decided to train to be her doula at the same time. So she's actually due any minute, where I'm actually on call for my first birth at the moment. So
that's so exciting. Wow. And you're the first person I'm speaking to for the whole little podcast.
Love it.
So that's really beautiful. Wow. Okay. So you haven't had that birth yet. That's happening now. Okay. That's super exciting. Yeah. How are you feeling about being on call?
Well, it's interesting. I'm really reflecting on my own self-care practices and realizing at any moment I might have to go be like fully on for however many hours, days. And so really like catching where my self-care isn't quite on point and going like, okay, Maddie, how can you be more nourished in this moment? Like it's like this initiation into becoming your own doula first. So how can you best support yourself? How can you best nourish yourself? What do you need, you know? And I'm really flowing with that at the moment. And I've taken actually a couple of weeks off my treating because I do body work and have clients for coaching and sessions one-on-one. And I've just kind of like allowed space for this kind of portal to unfold and for me to be as ready as possible for her when she's ready and baby's ready.
Beautiful. Well, I'm sort of tuning into making sure that you are caring for yourself first and foremost, so that your cup is as full as it can be when the time comes for you to care for.
Totally.
We really need to be intentional about that, don't we? Because it's so easy in roles of the doula, and I'm sure the roles that you have, the other hats that you wear, where we support other people all the time. And often we are sort of right at the bottom of the list. And I was reflecting on that just this afternoon with a postpartum visit with a mum who I spent 2.5 hours cooking with and making all this beautiful food whilst thinking to myself, what will we feed my own family for dinner? It happens all the time. So yeah, it's really important to keep that in your mind as you're starting out and to try to sort of maintain that practice of looking after yourself and creating space where possible.
I feel lucky that I've, had that initiation already with like supporting others through one-on-one sessions but it just like, it levels up. I've noticed for this kind of work. And I think maybe those who haven't had experience with what like this very intense supportive work can be might have a tendency to not really do that enough at the start and, jeopardize their own health and self. So, yeah. Really
in my experience, I've seen as well that the reverse can be true, where we are very sort of good at doing it at the start, but the more into the work we get, the more births we attend, the more we are on call, and we end up being on call for months and months at a time or years at a time, that and perhaps not pay as much attention to caring for ourselves, because it's a lot to balance all the things, and having sort of optimal care for self or, creating space every time we're on call is not always possible.
Yeah, totally. Especially as parents and mothers.
Before your friend became pregnant and asked you to be her doula, did you know what a doula was?
I had a doula for my birth. So.
Okay.
Yeah. And I really respected and loved seeing people working in women's health and birth support for the longest time. A lot of my clients are female-bodied and doing a lot of like sexual healing and release from sexual trauma spaces. You kind of midwife people back to themselves anyway. So this is just like another version of that, I guess.
It's like a natural extension of that role, taking you into accompanying them into more places. Do you foresee that the body work and the sexual healing and yoni massage and other work that you're doing will naturally, I'm just curious, do you see that the relationships you have with the other clients that are seeking that support, you will also be sharing with them about your doula services? I guess they're not all pregnant, so.
I guess everything's under the one umbrella, so I think my clients that follow me on social media have seen that I'm doing that journey, and they ask me about it as well, even if they're not pregnant, So yeah, it's definitely becoming a part of because my business is me, like it's just whatever shape my interest is taking and whatever I'm offering expands in and out of different spaces, includes, flower essences, flower medicine, sound healing, reiki. So my clients are kind of used to there being a lot of tools in the tool basket. So they're like, okay, cool, there's another one coming. That's exciting. The thread through it all is that when I am with clients on the table or practicing or supporting others, I am in that liminal space, which is where birth really resides, and it's in full swing. And listening to the body is really my superpower. So it's like listening through the hands, listening through touch, listening through the energetics, intuition. Like those skills for me have been so hyper attuned over 10, 13 years of bodywork. So I feel like that's a really great gift that I bring to the birth space.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other things that you've been doing will no doubt really complement what you bring as a doula to support people during the childbearing continuum. Yeah, wonderful. So you've told me a bit about your unique journey and how you came to be on call now for the first time for your first birth and the practice you are sort of looking after yourself to prepare for that. And have you started to promote yourself as a doula and look for other clients, or are you sort of still just open to maybe how this might unfold? Like, do you sort of have a direction in mind, or are you sort of playing it by?
To be honest, like I think the way that I want to be working as a doula is to be really utilizing all of my skills. So like what I found with my client who I'm on call for at the moment, who invited me into her birth space, which was a catalyst for me becoming a doula, is that from the beginning, from her being like, I don't know, 11, 12 weeks when she told me, we've worked together through her relationship issues, her mother-child issues, her parent issues, her dynamics, like coaching her with herself, all of the things around, the noise around. And I feel like the way that I would best be of service in this work is to really go deep with people through their journey. So have massage monthly, to have, yoni massage to release any tension or disconnection between the woman and her, her sacred sexuality and her womb space and her vulva and her internal places, because unfortunately there is so much disconnection and confusion in life, and we don't all have those pillars of understanding in ourselves set when we become pregnant. And so to really support women to come to their power and their truth and their body's communion with themselves, that's really where I feel like I can best be of service, to work in depth throughout in the months before.
A really, really intensive and hands-on support and care and healing.
And like that would be my preference. But, like I am kind of opening into the possibility of postpartum support. I had a friend actually last year, and it's funny with this work, I sometimes find myself doing the work before I've actually realized I'm doing it. So I had a friend who I went to primary school with, and she had her baby, I think it was a month and a bit before her due date, and she wasn't ready. It was her first baby. She was maybe in denial that it was happening as soon as it was happening, and she just didn't have the house ready at all. And I had a dream where all of the women in her family visited me. All her sisters and her mum were like, why are you there? Why aren't you helping? And I was like, okay. And I called her the next day and I was just like, hey, like, what do you need? Like, I'm going to come and help you sort out your house and get ready, And I ended up supporting her really intensively postpartum for a few months, because her relationship actually fell apart because it wasn't a very healthy one. So just to say that you kind of find yourself in the role already, regardless of whether you offer it. And so I guess I'm open to how I will be needed and make that fit whoever feels called to work with me. But I definitely have preferences to be able to go deep with people. So they're really prepared, like physically, psychically, spiritually, and emotionally.
Yeah. But as you said, it's often not until we are in relationship with a client or somebody that we sort of even know how that support will look, or what
Yes.
parts of what of the many things that we bring will be the ones that are called on there or the ones that are needed. And so I certainly have an approach in my work where I'm just sort of intuitive in the way that I show up and just read what's going on and play it by ear, basically, because it's quite an unpredictable sort of emotional landscape to traverse through, obviously from pregnancy through to postpartum, and we never quite know what support will be needed. But
Totally.
it's great to be flexible in that sense. So you've sort of given us a bit of a view of what you're sort of, where you're moving towards, I suppose. So I'm curious, I know that you haven't been supporting births yet, and you're just sort of on the precipice of that right now. What do you envision will be the most challenging thing about supporting mums during birth, labour and birth, and sort of adding the doula hat to your kit?
I think I see a few things coming up. Firstly, to do with the initiation of like a first baby. I know from my own personal experience that you don't really have a lived understanding of what hospitals can look like until you're in them doing the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that line of fully engaging with the mother's choices and needs and desires without scaring her into awareness of what could happen with certain choices. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that like really delicate dance of knowing a lot and not wanting to give the information in a way that isn't supportive.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that the mother still feels like she has agency to choose whatever it is she wants to choose, and trying to be soft in that place of being in total service to the mother, but also trying to ensure that if she wants a natural physiological birth, that she's well informed. I think that is a delicate dance. And I know you've been a doula for a long time, so you probably have a lot of experience with those kind of spaces. But yeah, that feels like something I'm still learning how to work with. I think another thing will also be juggling my business with being on call, because when I am in session, usually my sessions go up to 3 hours, and, you know, phones on do not disturb, total devotional space to that person. And so like trying to understand how to be on call, but also be completely devoted to others while on call. I'm still trying to work out how that will look.
Yeah, that's a tricky balance.
Yeah.
We might unpack this a bit and then come back to the previous point that you talked about, you know, how much to share or how much not to share, and so forth. So in terms of being completely present for the people that you're serving in that devotional space for those 3 hours or 2 hours or whatever the time may be, I guess, you know, it's over time as you attend more births and sort of integrate that more into your life and work, I suppose, and it becomes one rather than separate. Your clients will know that you're also on call, but you will most likely, you'll be in touch with your doula clients in early labour, of course. You'll know there's normally warning. It's very rare that a mum, in my experience at least, goes from no signs of labour to being in full labour in a matter of, you know, short hours. It's normally a really gradual process. So you will have plenty of warning signs that labour's getting close in the next day or 2 or 3, and, you know, even in the next hours when it's getting a bit closer. So,
and it's reassuring.
Yeah, I think it's probably just experience that will help you to feel more clear about how that will look, that holding of space for other people for an extended period of time whilst also being on call. And over time, I imagine that, you know, being on call just kind of becomes part of life, and it's also not separate. It's just part of the way that you live, and you just carry on with life and trust that it will all work out. And I think something that I've been thinking about a lot over the past year is how I really feel that there's a power of some kind that sort of sits above and orchestrates the way that births play out and the way that support plays out and who's at a birth, because life is so busy and unpredictable with family as well, but somehow it always works out if it's meant to. So I think if we have the right intentions and trusting as well that our presence is also maybe not essential to the outcome of somebody's labour. A lot of the time, most meaningful work happens before the birth, before the labour even starts. And, you know, we might be sick on the day of a labour and not be able to be there. You know, we might have a child and life can get in the way, but
it's always perfect to the birth.
Yeah, and being transparent with the birth clients as well, and messaging them. Something that I do, for example, if I'm going to a ceremony, a 5-hour closing ceremony, for example, and I've got a mum who's close to dates or in early labour, I'll check in with her the night before in the morning just to see if there are any signs of labour and to let her know that I'm in ceremony, but that I will be checking just every now and then to see if she's been in touch, and, you know, just reassuring her that I'm there and also that I'm busy, I suppose. And they're always really receptive to that and understanding. And normally it's just like, yeah, nothing's happening here. It's all good.
Yeah, I love that.
So experience will hopefully make that clearer for you. I was interested as well to circle back to the part you said about, you know, just the challenge of knowing how much in order to support somebody really wholly and holistically, and to provide the information that you know will be useful for them, but not to provide too much at any given time, or perhaps not to provide all of it to every person because it may not be relevant to every person. And again, I think that's something that with experience will just become clearer for you in just responding to who's in front of you and what they're presenting with, and focusing on that rather than all the other things that you know.
And I really do believe that each person does have the birth they're meant to have, you know, and regardless of what that looks like, usually it's for a reason for their journey, you know, and trusting and allowing that if things don't go ideally for them, what they envisaged, that there's reasons for that are just as important, you know? So having softness around that.
Yeah, I definitely believe that too. And it's something that I talk to mums about. And again, even that conversation is a delicate one to have, because no one wants to imagine having a birth that's traumatic, or perhaps a mum that I'm supporting for a second or third or subsequent labour who did have a traumatic birth. It's sometimes hard to sort of digest, well, what was the purpose of the traumatic birth? But I also believe that there's medicine in every one of those stories. And sometimes it's not about the birth itself, but it's about the way that the person shows up to their relationships, or hands their power and agency over to other people, or doesn't have boundaries in place that are serving them, and they're, you know, serving other people more than themselves. And they're really hard lessons to learn through an experience like birth. But I also believe that there's medicine and learning in each experience, and that the births play out as they need to. And sometimes it's brutal, and that's hard. It's hard. So
I had a very difficult birth, so I feel very like anchored in that truth for myself, because it brought me to this work, you know, as well. And so many women in my doula course have had difficult births, and it's brought them to this work. And, you know, if it takes that sometimes for us to go, shit, there's change needed here. We need to stand up and do some work together.
Then, yeah,
exactly. Like, not to say that, you know, it's ideal, but, you know, our birth culture isn't very well at the moment. So we need all hands on deck.
My first birth was also very traumatic, and I'm also obviously now a birth worker many years later, after my second birth. I didn't ask you, you mentioned you had a 9-year-old son, and how many children do you have, Maddison?
Just one.
Just one. Okay. So in terms of balancing, do you envision that might be a challenge as well, to be on call balancing work with family, or not so much? Are you feeling sort of pretty supported around?
I have a partner who is amazingly supportive, and I was a single parent for a few years in the middle there. So I feel more supported than I've ever felt. So that feels really great. And he's like kind of just at that age now where he has that independence, and he knows if I need to go away for a day or two, that everything will continue safely and happily in his world without much changing, apart from me not being there. So it feels okay. I think if he was any younger, it would be hard. And I think that's also one of the reasons why I didn't say yes to this work any sooner.
Yeah, that must be reassuring. I have a 9-year-old son as well, actually. Yeah, it must be reassuring to know that it won't be very disruptive for him.
Yeah. Yeah, he does get jealous and needy if he hasn't had enough attention. But, you know, we just deal with that after lots of cuddles. Yeah.
So you mentioned if he had been younger, you may not have sort of heeded the call to this work.
Yeah.
So in saying that, do you feel that the call presented itself many times prior to this particular woman that you're now supporting?
I feel like it was really just a knowing, like as soon as I'd become pregnant with him and started learning about it, I was like, I want to do this work one day. And I just always knew from that point.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And what do you think will be the most enjoyable thing about adding the role of doula to your toolbox or suite of services and offerings?
Yeah. I actually feel like in some ways the pure like joy and celebration of new life is just something to have such reverence for, and to be able to be trusted into those like love bubbles and emergences of new beings on the planet. Like, what a gift. That just feels so exciting, especially because I do work with a lot of trauma for people and a lot of hard stuff and support people to come through difficult times. It feels nice to kind of balance that out with a little bit of joy and celebration, just whatever terrains may be on either side of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amazing. So is there anything that you would like to ask me as a doula of nearly 5 years, or any questions that you have for me, or anything else that you'd like to share about where you are now, or where you're going, or where you've been?
One thing I do notice that I would love to talk into a little bit with you is how doulas price their work, because I feel personally that a lot of doulas undercharge for their work, for what they offer.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like there is like an endemic of women in service and in devotional roles and in caring roles not being paid properly. And for starters, I feel that women are paid less across all roles.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a given, unfortunately, at the moment still. But even more so in these kind of women's work spaces, I think it's really important that people coming into these fields are valuing their time, valuing that when they're in service to another, they're away from their families and they're not able to be doing things for themselves. And, that is also a cost, especially if they have young kids themselves or whatever. And I just kind of have noticed a little bit that people undercharge, and it makes me feel a bit frustrated and sad, actually. Because then it obviously, like any industry, it's competitive and, you want to get work and whatever. But yeah, I don't know if you've noticed that or if you have anything to say into that. But I feel very strongly about that.
Yeah, it's a great point to raise. And what I've noticed is that there seems to be quite a huge variety in fee structures and offerings among doulas, numbers of visits, duration of visits, things that are included in visits, things that are done outside of visits, but that perhaps aren't accounted for in the visit, but need to be accounted for. I think it's also important to consider, as you said, women are underpaid across all areas. I think there's another big piece that's also around our self-worth as women, that there's a lot of work to be done on our collective self-worth and individual self-worth, and that talking about money and charging for services is something that a lot of people find really uncomfortable. And I think also a lot of women end up in the work of doula or doula birth support, birth keeper, out of such a passion and yearning and calling from the heart that they really grapple with actually putting a price on it, because it feels like it's a passion. And, how do you put a price on a passion? They'd do it for free until maybe they've been in it for long enough to realize that it's not sustainable to do it for free, or to do it for a low fee. But also I think we need to remember that everyone's lifestyles and circumstances are different, and some people don't have a financial need to work because they're actually being supported by another breadwinner, if you like. And the monetary aspect of the doula work is actually insignificant to them because it's not something that they need. Whereas others might be, single parents and of multiple children who need the work and need the income.
Yeah.
A huge variety of realities and experiences and circumstances that are in that probably impact the different ways that people price themselves. I think there's also simply sometimes a lack of understanding of the amount of work that goes into providing this kind of support for a family. And a lot of people haven't structured their packages in a way that accounts for all of those expenses. And they may not even know how to do that. I think there's a lot of doula trainings that just don't adequately cover the business related stuff. So it's a journey. A lot of people, I think, my experience talking to a lot of doulas over the past 5 years, most of us are led to it through the heart, and we don't necessarily start the work of a doula intending to turn it into an enterprise and a business and a real sort of money generating endeavor until perhaps that balance is tipped from I'm not getting any work at all to, oh my gosh, I'm now getting enough work to get a regular monthly income and this is actually a business and maybe I need to reassess this, but they haven't done the business related training or preparation. So there's a big gap, I think, a lot in the formation of doulas a lot of the time. And I think that's part of the problem as well. Yeah. Do you have any more thoughts on why that might be? Also, sorry, the final thing I wanted to add, I think, people starting out, I started out offering my doula services as a student doula for $300, which is nothing. Like it wouldn't have even covered.
My gosh.
And I gradually increased my prices. But over the past 4 years, I've increased them a number of times. But I guess it's always been informed by sort of feeling into myself. It's certainly breaking down my packages, looking at what costs what and making sure that everything's accounted for. But also having more experience, having more confidence. And also sometimes it's about pricing ourselves to be at the right point in a market and what others are pricing and trying to fit ourselves accordingly. But it's hard to compare because we're all different.
Which I think is that's the interesting bit, is that like if there's a general thing, then we're all kind of in there together,
Yeah, but if it's like this, like you said, then even if we're looking at where do we put ourselves, I think we could just use that as part of the information, but not all of it. We have to look at as well, what do we want our hourly fee to be? And how do we charge an hourly? Some people don't like to charge an hourly fee, but for me personally, I look at my package and number of hours that I spend in each visit and average number of hours at a birth. And of course, sometimes it's much more and sometimes it's much less, but the average number of hours that I'll spend at a birth, and then put a figure on the hours. So at least I know that that minimum is being covered and then adding the other bits on top of it. So you have to be quite creative, I think, as well. And I think it's a really important thing to keep talking about amongst ourselves and asking people as well, how did you come to that price? And even asking people if they'd be willing to share with you a breakdown of their package fees. Because what we put on the external face of our business on the website or whatever, it's just a package. But what we don't see is the part that's allocated to being on call, the part that's allocated to admin, the part that's allocated to perhaps having a backup, or the part that's allocated to buying ingredients for cooking or time spent at home preparing for this or that. So if we have those conversations and we don't know, we're all just guessing. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, totally. And not have like that weird discomfort around it, because it's like, well, for you to be able to really give from fullness, you need to be okay. You need to have all your stuff in order and to have safety in your life, and the society we live in, money is equated in those terms, So I think the other interesting point to raise is that a lot of the time clients who might want to have a doula may not be the main financial breadwinner or custodian of the finances in the relationship. So there might be a gatekeeper there who's not a female-bodied person and who might not understand even what doula work is, or you know what I mean? And so then there's that extra level of like somebody else there who doesn't necessarily understand the depth of work that doulas and birth attendants do.
Yeah, absolutely. Having an extra gatekeeper there or somebody else who also hasn't been doing the research on birth outcomes and wellness and all of that, and they just are the gatekeeper of the money, and that's really challenging. So also just, a general undervaluing of anybody in any care providing work, care provision, whether it's for pregnant families or young children or elderly people or people with disabilities.
Yes, 100%.
So it's a challenge. But I think, it'd be great if we could bring these conversations more to light, certainly amongst ourselves in the doula community, because for those of us emerging and trying to figure out where to place ourselves, it's an individual choice, of course, but there are impacts. As you said, people, if they're charging really low, then they may also be competitors. And although they might be offering something different to you and, a different suite of services, we don't know how much the bottom line is what informs a family's decision, or what tip it is other things. So it's a tricky one. I don't know how much that also plays across in other areas, that sort of real diversity of fees and so forth. I'm not sure.
Totally. Yeah, totally. And I think I just, I feel passionately about that because, working in healing arts, for example, that is a huge thing for this industry as well. People don't know how to charge for doing the work because they love it and they love helping people and they love making people feel better. And I exactly was in that position for God knows how many years. And you want to be accessible and you want to be available and you don't want to deny people access as well. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really great to be able to have a concession rate for whatever you offer, whatever service you offer, so that you can still support people that are in lower income brackets as well as people that aren't, and still kind of have that work itself out. I think that's a really great way to work around it. And as well, like, I think when you are charging adequately for your services and you feel clear and strong in those prices, then it allows you scope. If someone comes to you and goes, hey, I'm a single woman, I really want to have birth support, but I really don't have that many resources. Is there any way we can work together? And then you can say yes very clearly because you are looked after in the other facets of your business, And I really love working like that, in that, you have your rate a certain way set with concession and full fare. And then if that feels all clear, then you can offer just from your heart and support people just for the love of it and just because you want to, like that should be a part of it. Because it isn't all transactional, we are humans on the planet trying to thrive and support each other and be well and work it all out,
Well, we have to support ourselves, as we said at the start of the conversation, that it sort of comes back to ourselves so that we can look after others. So, yeah, I think it's definitely a conversation that's worthy of exploring more in the other spaces where doulas are, in the groups and forums and so forth. Maybe there's a conversation to open up there and to see, and to invite people to even share the breakdowns of their services to see. And I think sometimes that can be helpful for people to see others, because they can see, by seeing what somebody else is doing, it can help to inform perhaps what they've not realized or, not considered, and to adjust their own things. Yeah, it would be good I think that's a good one to explore further as well.
Do you have any advice for someone just starting on their doula journey that you wish you had kind of known at the start of yours, or someone had told you?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Thank you. I think that the key, there's probably a few things I've thought about it for longer, but the first thing that comes to mind is the diverse income streams, not relying entirely on birth support, in-person birth support. And obviously you're unique in that sense that you're sort of coming at it with already a whole suite of other services that are thriving, and you're sort of adding this to them rather than trying to, do this and then see what else you can do. Because if somebody's relying purely on attending births, it's a fast road to burnout. If you get enough clients to support yourself with the number of births that you think that you want each month, and you're doing lots of births and perhaps that's sort of it for your business, then I personally find that hard to sustain. Everyone's different. Other people have different levels of support to what I have. But yeah, diversifying your income streams and being really creative about generating diverse avenues to work in, different ways to support families and to generate income. That's probably the one thing I think, if you want your doula work to turn into a business that sustains you for the long term.
Yeah. I did recently buy some rebozos off you. Appreciate you stocking those gorgeous tools.
Yeah. Trade. I knew your name looked familiar. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So that's one of my income streams. I have a few, but I sort of created that one a few years ago, and there was a demand for rebozos, and I've got a long connection with Mexico, and I just decided to see if people were interested in having easier access to rebozos in Australia of high quality. So I did, and they do, and it's great. So
they're excellent. I love them. I've even just been wearing mine around my waist. So supportive. I feel like we should all women should be wearing rebozos. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but
yeah, rebozo. Yeah, I think we notice how supportive they are when we take them off, and we're like, oh gosh, things hold. Yeah,
totally. One other thing that I was told by a doula friend of mine was, she said that she feels that often the baby coming through kind of also chooses you to be the birth support. Like she feels like the women she's supported, it's been like very much aligned and a magical kind of experience of how they come together and find each other and the way that they work together and the healing that they do. And she says she often journeys alongside her clients and finds that a lot of healing happens for her as well in that journey. And I wondered if you'd had a similar experience with the women you've supported so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I say that I feel that there's a higher power of some nature sort of orchestrating things, I think that's, that applies, maybe it's the baby's spirit orchestrating it. I don't know. But yes.
I love that.
It's meant to be. And whether that's because there's a connection somehow with the baby or the mother, or if it's just a connection with the divinity of this connection with this family, I can't really explain it, but I do feel that there's something powerful there that, if we're meant to be there, we are. And if we're not, we're not. And it's kind of just as simple as that. It's easier said than done, because we can get quite anxious being on call and wondering if we'll be there or we won't, or, if this other same day or not. So trust, got to have trust. And the more experience we get, the more hopefully we can cultivate that trust. And also that understanding that we aren't essential components to somebody's birth. We don't have to be there. It's not our story. It's not our journey, and it's not about us. So if we're not there for some reason, it's also okay.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, being with women, allowing just kind of that, soft gaze on them without imposing in the space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, Maddison. And if people would like to learn more about your various offerings and your offerings as a doula, where will they find you online?
My website is www.templeandremedy.com.au. I'm pretty sure. I don't often type it in the URL, but also temple_and_remedy through Instagram or Facebook as well.
Okay, so beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
I will put a note of those in the show notes as well.
Exciting. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much for your time. Take care. Bye.
You too. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Maddison today on the Whole Doula podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Something that stood out to me from this conversation was how Maddison was actually the very first person that I spoke to when I was recording conversations for this new podcast of mine, and she was on call for her first birth. She hadn't actually attended a birth yet, but yet she was already a doula. So that's what stood out to me, and I'd love to hear what you thought about the show. If you'd like to get in touch with Maddison, you can find her via her website, her Instagram or Facebook profiles, via the show notes. Thanks so much for listening to the Whole Doula podcast with Mary Giordano. I hope you enjoyed listening to our conversation today. If so, please hit subscribe and consider leaving a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'll be back with another episode in 2 weeks. Have a beautiful day.